Welcome to The Hindu Editorial. My name is Ryan Pinto, and I'm going to present to you The Hindu Editorial of November 23rd. What are the topics for discussion on today's editorial? We have relationship between trade and growth. The first topic, which will be part of GS paper 3, economics. Second is Pakistan and terrorism. GS paper 3 again, national security and vaccine distribution policy. You can take it in GS paper 2, health, or GS paper 3, science and technology. So the first point or the first editorial for discussion is relationship between growth and trade. We know international trade is very important in a country's economy, and it has been growing since uh, 1991, that is LPG in India. Is India an open economy? That was the discussion we had made in the earlier lectures, or you can say discussions, editorial discussions. You can see in that. Today, our focus will be: is it true that international growth has not helped India to grow? International trade has not helped India to grow because we have our External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, who had said that because of the international trade, India has lost a lot of growth opportunities. In today's era of RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and various other organizations, like you have the SAARC and the NAFTA and the African Union, ASEAN, RCEP, TPP, etc. So, what is the way and what has India done? So, let's see that today. No, Minister, the trade agreement pitch is flawed. So the article is actually a critique on what the minister said. S. Jaishankar has said that the trade agreements that we had actually is not allowing us to grow, and it has impacted our economic growth. Whereas in the last discussion we had seen, economic survey said that the trade agreements are needed. So, what is the situation? What is the issue? We'll see by the facts. Citing trade agreements for India's below potential growth appears to be a way to deflect blame for policy errors. So, what S. Jaishankar is trying to do is deflecting the policy errors because of which the growth has not happened. So the growth is affected not because of the trade agreement, it is because of the policy errors. The minister believes that economic growth that has accrued from globalization is not good enough outcome for India. Globalization, which India has been very vocal about. Globalization, especially trade, is assessed in the broader context of its overall impact on society. The cost could be shown to have set off the gains considerably. That one such cost is deindustrialization. So, what the minister is trying to say, that the globalization has led to deindustrialization in India. That employment challenge was created by trade. That trade agreements have made India over dependent on imports. A new paper by Chatterjee and Arvind Subramaniam, India's Inward Return, Is It Warranted? Will It Work? Is instructive. So just remember, S. Jaishankar is saying globalization has actually led to deindustrialization in India. Employment challenge was created because of globalization. India opened up, a lot of imports came in, and which led to deindustrialization and that is why we have unemployment. So this is how S. Jaishankar is trying to cover up unemployment and the policy errors by putting it all on the LPG reforms which came in 1991. We had already seen, so you have to see the previous editorial where we had discussed, actually, is India that open? That's a question mark which we had discussed. A new paper by Soumitra Chatterjee and Arvind Subramaniam. Remember this paper? That's India's Inward Return. Is it warranted? Will it work? That's a paper which has been brought out by our earlier economic advisor, chief economic advisor Arvind Subramanian. Export led growth. Trade has delivered high growth, economic growth for the country. India's record of export led growth cannot be dismissed. So, we are going to see how the export led growth has been beneficial. Many times, questions will be asked in UPSC. Can there be a link between exports and economic growth? So, you need to remember these facts. Between 1995 and 2018, overall India's export grew at a pace of 13.4% in dollars annually. So India's export increased 13.4%. So growth every year was 13.4%. This is the third best performance in the country among the top 50 exporters. So you must have noticed during this time our economy also grew. It is nearly twice the world's average. The world, which was growing at around, the exports across the world was growing at around 6%. We are growing at around 13.4%. And China, which is considered one of the world's fastest growing economy, their exports was growing at around 15%. So we are not very far from China. So can we call it a bad performance? The minister also has a point when he says performance represents only limited progress relative to India's potential, and that this gap with the potential presents the real challenges. It is true that despite evident success, India is not a big exporter on the global scale. We are not a big exporter. Its share of global exports of manufacturing is only 1.7%, less than Vietnam's 1.75%. Our growth is 13.4%, but our overall share in the total world's exports, manufacturing exports, is only 1.7%. Remember this number. So 13.4% is our growth. Every year we grow by 13.4%. And out of the total share, ours is just 1.4%. Remember this. 1.7, sorry. Now, what was the reason? Why then, on if unemployment, the reason for unemployment is not exports, then what was the reason? Why did our exports not grow so much? Why did India didn't benefit so much? One of the major reason was strong rupee approach. How much of the blame can India's below potential growth can be ascribed to trade agreements? This causation, Mr. Jaishankar suggests, is problematic. The Narendra Modi government's strong rupee approach is among chief causes that have been shown to have slowed down exports. The real effective exchange rate has appreciated by about 20% since 2014. So one of the reason for the strong, or you can say increase in the imports and less of exports, was strong rupee. You must remember, whenever the rupee becomes strong, it benefits the importers and it hurts the exporters. So if Narendra Modi has followed this approach, it means it is going to hurt the exports. Then how can we blame the FTAs, the free trade agreement, for our less exports and more imports? If imports such as holidays and higher education overseas have leapt, it is because exchange rate has made them more affordable. Because of our strong rupee. When we say strong rupee, it means rupee, which was example 70 rupees per dollar, is now 65 rupees per dollar. So means the rupee has become strong. It will benefit the importers because you have to pay less rupees to get $1. And that is why imports become cheaper and better. Studies of trade agreements by Niti Aayog show Indian exporters suffer not only because of strong rupee but also logistics, compliance, transaction cost, low ease of doing business relative to other countries has further eroded the competitiveness. So it's not only strong rupee, but logistics also has a problem, transaction cost, ease of doing business. In case of pharmaceutical sectors, if you see specifically, trade agreements cannot be blamed because there was a lot of reputational losses also. So you can't just blame trade agreement saying that trade agreement is the reason. It is because of it. It was because of Narendra Modi government's strong rupee approach. Logistics suffering is there, transaction cost, ease of doing business is low, and if you see some sectors, there is a reputational advantage also. If the reputation is less, if our pharmaceutical sectors, our medicines are considered to be not up to the mark, then the exports reduces. On manufacturing, between 1995 and 2018, India's manufacturing exports grew on an average 12.1%, nearly twice the world average. This was third best performance in the world. So our total exports was growing around 13.4%, but our manufacturing exports were growing 12.1%. During this period, India's manufacturing export ranked within the top 10 among the 50 major exporters. Can this be characterized as deindustrialization? So, S. Jaishankar was saying our FTAs, trade agreements, led to deindustrialization. Is it true? You can see the facts. Between fiscal year 2006 to 12, manufacturing sector GDP grew by an average of 9.5%. Between 2006 to 12, remember, manufacturing sector was growing by 9.6%. India's trade openness was at its peak during these years. Growth that also overlaps with the period when the highest number of Indians in recorded history exited poverty. So S. Jaishankar is saying the FTAs led to deindustrialization. But see the facts. India was growing at 9.5%, and in during this time, trade was at its peak, openness was at its peak. We had many trade agreements, and during this time also only the people were removed out of poverty. Then over the next 6 years, manufacturing sector GDP growth declined to 7.4%, coinciding with the phase of corruption, banking crisis, demonetization, GST, none of which were the consequences of trade agreements. So you can't blame the trade agreements for our exports to fall, resulting in deindustrialization, resulting in less employment. So this is just deflecting of the issue. The paper by Chatterjee Subramaniam shows how openness through trade is in fact one of the few channels available to India for generating employment. In the post COVID 19 world, given the financial positions of household, governments and banks are too weak to support the economy. So this Chatterjee Subramanian report is actually saying being part of the RCP, being part of the trade agreements is actually going to help us in generating employment, because there is lack of demand in the country and governments can't put so much money. Banks are all crashing down, as we had seen in the earlier editorials. So we can depend on the open economy. They calculate that after 2008 global financial crisis, China vacated about $140 billion in exports in unskilled labor intensive sectors. You must understand, China is now going towards skilled and high end sectors. So the labor charges in China are high and they are not dealing with goods which are having unskilled labor intensive sectors, including apparel, clothing, leather and footwear. Has India taken over the vacuum? Answer is no. This vacuum was covered by Vietnam, Indonesia and other ASEAN countries. But India did not take the advantage of the opportunity. India is exporting about $60 billion of low skill exports annually, less than it can if the underlying problem are addressed. So the problem to be addressed are rupee that is the rupee dollar ratio, exchange rate, then you have the logistics and the other things that we discussed, ease of doing business, etc. The weakest case the minister makes is on the employment challenge, probably because economic arguments are playing an ever shrinking role. Today, the FTAs and the dealings with the other countries do not give more focus on economic arguments, rather than they give more focus on geopolitical or strategic reasons than the economic arguments. Curtailed roles of Department of Economic Affairs and Commerce and the role of Ministry of External Affairs taking over much of the economic diplomacy. So the Commerce Ministry is doing less in relationship between the people or the countries, but the External Affairs Ministry is doing more. Trade openness versus import substitution is the only debate where the policymaker need to look no further than India's own pre 1991 experience of inferior low quality products on the one hand and low growth rates on the other. So when we discuss about the trade openness, you must understand what was we are actually trying to go back to 1991, before 1991, by having a protectionists and focusing on more import substitution rather than export promotion. Globalization can solve problems are the multiple can solve problems at the multiple level, that is COVID-19 vaccines being readied across the world. They are in fact India's only hope of safeguarding the population. To denounce trade openness and globalization at this point is a poor timing. We are going to see COVID, we have already seen actually COVID-19, Pfizer, Moderna coming up with vaccine. If trade open is not there, then it will be difficult for us to procure and save and give vaccines to our people. It also serves to lend credibility to the anti-trade narrative invented by certain political outfits on the left and the right that have come to represent India's worst economic interests. So it's not only the left which is talking about the anti-trade narrative, even the right is now speaking about the openness and the anti-trade narrative. By blaming trade agreements for deindustrialization, Mr. S. Jaishankar seeks to deflect blame from Modi government's policy errors. So this was an important article which was linked with the earlier one. So in conclusion, we can say India switched to a strong rupee policy in line with the Prime Minister's pre-2014 election campaign led to the surge in imports of goods and services preferred by non-rich Indians and a measurable loss of competitiveness in labor-intensive exports. At the same time, the disadvantages Indian exporters have long struggled against, the substantially higher logistics and other costs remain as burdensome. So that was the whole article, very important. The next article that we are going to talk about is terrorism and Pakistan. You can see on your screen on the first in the first picture we have Pakistan in the LOC gives a launch pad to various terrorists to infiltrate in India. Over here we have our brave Indian soldiers fighting against the Pakistanis and the terrorists and saving our lives. And the third we have Hafiz Saeed, who is a conspirator of the 2000, you can say the Mumbai 26/11 attacks, 2008, and even a lot of conspiracies and terror attacks have been done under his leadership, and we want him to be brought under the books. Let's see what Pakistan does. Pressure and punishment. The world must focus or force Pakistan to take tangible steps against terror networks. The conviction of Hafiz Saeed. So you have seen the picture. A UN designated terrorist whom India and the US blame for 2008 Mumbai terror attacks that killed 166 by a Lahore anti-terrorism court on terror finance charges shows that Pakistan can be forced to act against terror networks under international pressure. So Hafiz Saeed has been convicted and given around 10 years of imprisonment. It shows that if international pressure is put, Pakistan can be forced to take action against terrorism. Pakistan uses its terrorism as a policy for diplomacy. So that's a very dangerous policy. And against India, we know it uses bleeding India with thousand cuts, because Pakistan knows that India cannot be defeated in a conventional battle. So they use these tactics. The repeated convictions of someone who was a favorite of Pakistan's military establishment till a few years ago in terror financing cases underscores the concerns India and the US have about his operations. So about Hafiz Saeed, you must know he was a favorite of Pakistan's military. He first found LET in the 1990s, targeting India. When the terror group came under international pressure, he revived the JUD, supposedly an Islamic charity organization, in 2002, which India accuses of being an LET front. So he started with the LET, and then since it was under pressure because of anti-India activities, he changed the name to, or he can say, he changed it to JUD. So LET is Lashkar-e-Taiba and JUD is Jamaat-ud-Dawa. So JUD is actually a charitable organization. So just imagine, behind the garb of, or you can say cover of charitable organization, they are doing anti-India activities. Even after Mumbai attacks, Pakistan refused to act against Saeed and his networks. It was only after US declared a bounty on Saeed's head and UN proscribed his organization that Pakistan, facing pressure from FATF, banned his organization. So FATF is Financial Action Task Force, and its work is to see to it that the money is not used for terror organization in the countries. Unsurprisingly, the latest conviction comes a month after FATF. So we'll be looking at FATF in detail in another video, and you all can look at that video and see what the FATF does and where it is formed and the work it has done. For now, you have to remember, it is a global dirty money watchdog, urged Pakistan to complete an international agreement or agreed action plan to fight terror financing, looks after the terror financing part. The FATF still placed Pakistan on the grey list in 2018 and demanded more actions from Islamabad to avoid being blacklisted. So once they were in the grey list, Pakistan slowly, hesitantly started acting over the terrorists, but still the FATF put it in the grey list. It wants to take more action. It wants Pakistan to take more action. The anti-terrorism department's FIRs against Saeed and his aides accused the JUD, Jamaat Dawa, of financing terrorism from its fund collection in the name of charity through NGOs. There are no doubts, because Pakistan had used anti-India and Afghan terrorist networks for strategic advantages. It was this dual policy of fighting terror at home while nurturing terror groups that target its rival abroad that has been responsible for Pakistan's predicament. If it is serious about fighting terrorism, Pakistan should crack down on terror financing and terror infrastructure. The international community and organization, including FATF, should keep up the pressure until Islamabad shows tangible outcomes. So you must remember Pakistan's policy of bleeding India through thousand cuts and using terrorism as its policy in international policy, or you can say for its diplomacy. So this is the second editorial, which is going to be part of international relations and national security, GS paper 2, GS paper 3 respectively. Now we are going to see the editorial on vaccine, especially on development of vaccine and the most important part, how to distribute the vaccine. This is now an important question. The question when COVID-19 had come was, are we going to make the vaccine? If yes, when? Then the question came, how many countries will be making the vaccine and when are we going to get the vaccine? Now the question is, since many vaccines are in the phase 3 of the trials, they are very close, is now the question is on the distribution part. In vaccine race last lap, the key steps for India. So this is what we need to be very careful of. So this is going to be part of biotechnology, science and technology paper 3 or governance. Linked, or you can say health also, linked to government plan of supply from multiple sources is need for a concise recipient prioritization policy. So we need a recipient prioritization policy, means who is going to get, when he is going to get, what is a charge of the vaccines, etc. An ideal vaccine would provide all of these. So when we say a vaccine, what does it give us? Immunity that is of a high degree, 90% plus, protective especially against severe illness, broad scale against different variants, and durable. Vaccine that is safe, little or no side effects, and definitely no serious adverse effects. A vaccine that is cheap. So remember, it should be giving us immunity, it should have a broad scale, it should be safe, cheap. A vaccine that is programmatically suitable. Single dose can be kept at room temperature or at worst needs simple refrigeration, 2 degrees to 4 degrees. Needle free delivery. A vaccine that is available in multi dose vials. Multi dose vials means you can take more than one dose in liquid form, having long shelf life and can be used for rapid production. This is how an ideal vaccine is. Remember, it should be give us immunity, it should be safe, broad scale. So just remember that again, revising with you. Immunity, safe, broad scale, cheap, programmatically suitable, have a multi-dose vials, long shelf life, can be used for production. A difficult vaccine to develop. Historically, we have faced difficulties in the development of coronavirus vaccine. Mostly the coronavirus vaccine, in case of, you must have heard about SARS, that is severe acute respiratory syndrome, MERS, that is Middle East respiratory syndrome, both are coronaviruses. It is always difficult to have a vaccine against coronaviruses. The previous corona vaccines were found to be immunogenic, that is only till the phase 2, but did not effectively prevent acquisition of disease in phase 3, fueling a concern that will this vaccine for coronavirus 2019, COVID-19, will it be standing its ground in the phase 3? It's a question mark. About the safety of vaccine, there are always possibilities of rare 1 in a million or delayed serious adverse events which will come to light only after mass vaccination has started. This requires a good post licensure surveillance system to be in place. So we have seen what do you expect from a vaccine. We have seen what is the issue of the corona vaccine. We are also understanding that the issues will come only after you have mass vaccination done, after you do the surveillance and keep a check. The COVID-19 vaccines candidate Moderna and Pfizer have already released early information of high effectiveness, 90 plus percent, reaching up to 94%. Pfizer 2-dose shots needs to be stored in minus 70 degrees. It is we had discussed in the earlier editorial. It is very difficult for this infrastructure to be in India. Minus 74 degrees, 130 crore people having it. Moderna's vaccine is more thermostable and requirements similar to that of a normal oral vaccine. AstraZeneca, also a frontrunner, makes use of simplified storage settings as do many other candidates. So remember, in India we are looking at Moderna, we are looking at Pfizer, we are looking at AstraZeneca. So understanding the prioritization, recipient prioritization, then what are the issues with the vaccine and what can we expect for the COVID vaccine. The first rule would be not to put all your eggs in one basket. Second would be to prioritize. For this, we need to rank population subgroups by risk category, risk of infection or adverse outcomes or economic impact. So, some things which we keep in mind when we distribute: first is don't put all the eggs in one basket. Second is prioritize according to the risk population or economic impact, and by programmatic ease of vaccination based on their captivity. Healthcare workers, organized workers, workplace, schools. So all these things needs to take care of. And access to existing channels of vaccination, pregnant women, children. Start with these two criterias, intersect healthcare workers followed by policemen. So we are just discussing on the priorities. So first rule is don't put all your eggs in one basket. It means don't buy just one vaccine and focus on one company. Should be open to many other alternatives. Second is prioritize. Third rule is multiple channels to immunize the population. Other important consideration would be equity and cost. So see to it that that the vaccination is reaching to the poorest of the poor people, the weakest of the weakest people, not just those who have money, etc. Models of social mobilization. Now, when we are prioritizing, then we link it with social issues. Should not be only the rich or only the strong, only the powerful can attain this. It shows how unequal we are. So the problems will arise as we move towards vaccinating the general population, even high risk groups, elderly and those with comorbidity in the general population. Queuing system based on an earlier registration process for age and presence of comorbidity and allotment and appointment in a nearest booth. So we need to take information. We need to focus on people. We need to sort out whom should be giving first. How can we reach to them? The greatest challenge would be to immunize the poorest and the most vulnerable, which are living in slums, refugees, migrants with disabilities. We have learned major lessons, so we can learn from the social mobilization efforts which was in the Pulse polio campaigns, Aadhaar card enrollment, which will serve as good models. It is expected that the pandemic would start receding once we reach about 60% of vaccination in terms of coverage and effectiveness. However, we should ensure that this coverage is well spread out. Else focal outbreaks will keep occurring in areas with poor vaccine coverage. This also raises the possibility of using a ring immunization strategy, immunizing the population around the reported cases even earlier. So these are the various strategies. Dealing with pay and get. One major challenge would be that many people would be willing to pay for the vaccine and ask for the expedited access. Allow the vaccine to be available in the private market at a market driven price. It will be ethical as well as cost saving for the government if it does not divert vaccines from the government driven program. So you have some for the private, let them do it. Whoever can pay, let them get it. But whoever has, if the number we have kept for government driven program, do not touch that. Many countries have already published their prioritization policy, whereas in India, it is only based on what we hear from the media, that healthcare workers have been prioritized and details are not available in public domain. It is critical that the government has a fair, transparent and published policy in this regard. So very important editorial for the future course of action and what we can expect in the future once the vaccines come into consideration. So we have seen three articles. Article first was on the base for, you can say, RCEP and the free trade agreements. Second on the national security. Third on the vaccine. So remember, the art and science of asking questions is source of all knowledge. Thank you.